Across Canada, from small towns to quiet highways, there are stories that remain frozen in time. Families who vanished, young people who never made it home, and mysteries that have lingered for decades. These are not tales of headlines that faded overnight. These are the cold cases that still haunt communities, the disappearances that defy explanation, and the questions that have never been answered. So settle in, because what you're about to hear are some of the most chilling unsolved disappearances in Canadian history. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where and what time are you watching this from? And make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss more cold cases like these. The Jack family disappearance. August 1st, 1989. Prince George, British Columbia. A quiet home sits on Strathcona Avenue. Toys are scattered in the living room. A family photo still rests on the shelf, but the house is empty, eerily empty. Ronald and Doreen Jack, along with their two young sons, Russell, just 9 years old, and Ryan, only 4, are nowhere to be found. The neighbors notice, the lights don't turn on, the children don't come out to play. By the next morning, it's as if the entire family has simply vanished into thin air. No goodbye calls, no signs of packing, no struggle, just silence. And soon, investigators will realize, this is not just another missing persons case. This will become one of Canada's most haunting unsolved family disappearances. Ronald Jack was a 26-year-old father, quiet and hard-working. He'd held various jobs, mostly labor work, but was struggling to find steady employment to support his wife and children. Like many families in northern BC at the time, money was tight and work was scarce. His wife, 26-year-old Doreen, was described as devoted, protective, and soft-spoken. Friends remembered her as someone who kept to herself, focusing on raising Russell and Ryan. Russell was the curious, energetic 9-year-old, the kind of boy who loved the outdoors, always eager to explore. Ryan, at just 4, was the baby of the family, cheerful and shy. They weren't wealthy. They weren't well connected. They were an ordinary family, trying to get by, which makes their disappearance all the more chilling, because ordinary families don't just vanish overnight. On the evening of August 1st, 1989, Ronald phoned his mother with what sounded like good news. He told her he had been offered a new job up north, a logging position that included housing for the entire family. According to Ronald, a man had approached him at a local pub, offering the work. It was short-term, maybe 2 weeks, but the pay would be decent. The catch? They needed to leave immediately. Ronald's mother remembered him sounding upbeat, hopeful, even relieved. She had no reason to suspect danger, but that would be the last time she ever heard from her son. That night, Ronald, Doreen, Russell, and Ryan left their home. They didn't take much. Their belongings, their furniture, and their children's toys remained untouched. It looked as though they fully intended to come back, but they never did. When days passed with no word, concern grew. Relatives reported them missing. Police entered the home and found everything in place, nothing disturbed. There were no signs of violence, no note, no indication that the family had planned to leave for good. Investigators quickly focused on Ronald's phone call. Who was this man who offered him a logging job? Where was the job site? And why did the family have to leave in such secrecy and haste? But in 1989, there were no cell phones, no GPS trackers, no security cameras on every corner. The trail was cold almost immediately. RCMP canvassed local logging companies and camps. None reported offering Ronald work. No official records existed of a job that matched his description. It was as if this opportunity had been fabricated. Witnesses recalled Ronald mentioning the man in the pub, but no one could describe him clearly. Some said he was in his 40s, others thought younger. The story blurred quickly. A few weeks later, investigators received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed the Jack family had been killed and buried on a rural property outside Prince George. Search teams descended on the site, digging and combing the area, but nothing was ever found. The lead went nowhere. Over the years, multiple theories have surfaced. The most widely accepted idea is that the family was lured under false pretenses. Someone may have targeted Ronald at the pub, gained his trust, and used the job as a trap. Why? Motive has never been clear. Robbery, revenge, or something more sinister. Some speculated that the Jacks chose to leave voluntarily. But this theory never made sense. They left behind everything: possessions, toys, keepsakes. They had no money, no plan, no history of running away. Prince George sits along Highway 16, now infamous as the Highway of Tears, for the staggering number of disappearances, many involving indigenous women and girls. Some believe the Jack family's case could be linked, though it stands apart because an entire family vanished together. A fringe theory suggested the family may have stumbled into something dangerous and were either silenced or relocated under protection, but no evidence supports this. At the time, the case made headlines across British Columbia, but attention faded. Without bodies, without evidence, the media cycle moved on. The family's relatives, however, never stopped searching. They kept the story alive, urging the RCMP not to close the file. For them, every birthday, every Christmas, was a painful reminder that 4 chairs at the table remained empty. Despite multiple reviews of the case over the decades, no arrests have ever been made. The anonymous tipster was never identified. No remains have been located. Even today, Ronald and Doreen's names, along with Russell and Ryan, appear on Canada's official missing persons registry. The RCMP has occasionally reissued appeals, hoping that with time, someone might come forward. But more than 3 decades later, silence remains. What makes this case so unsettling is the sheer scale of the disappearance. A husband, a wife, 2 children, entire families rarely vanish without a trace. Normally there are clues: a vehicle abandoned, a suitcase left behind, a body found. But here, nothing. The Jack family's story is often mentioned in the same breath as other northern BC disappearances, highlighting broader concerns about safety, missing persons investigations, and the vulnerability of working-class families just trying to survive. For the Indigenous community in particular, their disappearance echoes a painful pattern: cases that receive little resolution, families left with endless uncertainty. More than 30 years have passed since that quiet summer night in Prince George. Ronald and Doreen would be in their 60s today. Russell and Ryan would be grown men, perhaps with families of their own. Instead, they remain frozen in time, forever remembered as the young parents and children who walked out of their home and into mystery. Somewhere, someone knows what happened. Maybe it was the stranger in the pub. Maybe it was someone closer to home. Maybe the truth is buried deep in the forests of northern British Columbia. But until it's uncovered, the Jack family's disappearance will remain one of Canada's most haunting unsolved cold cases. Decades later, the truth remains buried. But someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to the Jack family? Was it a trap, a random act, or something much bigger? The disappearance of Mekayla Bali. April 12, 2016. Yorkton, Saskatchewan. The morning begins like any other in this small prairie city. People rush for coffee, kids make their way to school, and buses pull into the depot, one after another. But at 1:45 p.m. inside that same depot, a security camera captures a final image that will come to define one of Canada's most haunting mysteries. 16-year-old Mekayla Bali is seen waiting alone. She paces, she checks her phone, she glances out the door as if searching for someone who never arrives. Minutes later, she walks away, and from that moment on, she is never seen again. Mekayla Bali was only 16 years old. A high school student at Sacred Heart in Yorkton, she lived at home with her mom and grandmother. Friends described her as kind, a little shy, with a love for animals and music. She was the kind of teenager who dreamed of bigger things, but was still deeply tied to the routines of small-town life. Like many girls her age, Mekayla spent a lot of time online. Social media was a place where she felt more open, more adventurous. She connected with people outside her circle, some real, some perhaps not who they claimed to be. And in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she seemed restless, searching for something, or maybe someone. Her last day began like any other. But as the hours unfolded, it became clear she had plans no one close to her fully understood. That Tuesday morning, April 12th, Mekayla woke up and got ready for school. She even texted a friend to meet before classes began. But once she arrived at school, she left almost immediately, signing herself out around 8:30 a.m. What followed was a series of puzzling movements across town. Surveillance cameras and witness reports later helped piece together her steps. 50 a.m. Mekayla was spotted at a local TD bank attempting to withdraw money. She didn't have enough funds to make the withdrawal. Shortly after, she went to a pawn shop asking about cashing in a ring, but decided against it. Chowns, 10 a.m. She stopped at a restaurant, chatted with staff, and used the phone several times. Witnesses recalled her asking about a man, but never explained who he was. 10:30 a.m. She entered the STC bus depot. She inquired about buying a ticket to Regina, then stepped back outside to make calls from a payphone. But no one could confirm who she was trying to reach. 2 p.m. 1:30 p.m. Mekayla wandered between the depot, local restaurants, and the street, at times sitting, at times pacing, as if she was waiting for someone specific. 45 p.m. The final confirmed sighting. She walked out of the bus depot doors and disappeared. She never boarded a bus. She never returned home. And her phone activity ended soon after. At first, police considered the possibility that Mekayla was a runaway. She had asked friends if she could borrow money. She had searched online for travel routes. Some believed she may have been planning to leave Yorkton voluntarily. But the more investigators dug, the less sense it made. Mekayla had left behind everything: clothes, personal items, even her beloved pet. She hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't withdrawn enough cash to get far. And most importantly, she had not been seen since that afternoon. Her family immediately pushed back against the runaway theory. They described her as reliable, the kind of girl who wouldn't disappear without telling someone where she was going. The RCMP launched a full investigation. They combed through surveillance footage, phone records, and social media. And soon, troubling questions emerged. Her actions that morning, borrowing money, going to the depot, repeatedly checking the payphone, suggest she may have been waiting for someone. Who that person was, however, has never been confirmed. Some believe she arranged to meet someone she trusted, but who may not have been who they claimed. Some argue Mekayla may have left by choice, looking for a fresh start. But without money, ID, or belongings, this theory weakens. 16-year-olds rarely have the resources to vanish for years without help. The darkest theory is that Mekayla was lured into a trap. The bus depot, her repeated attempts to contact someone, and her growing anxiety all hint that she was waiting for a meeting that never ended safely. When Mekayla was first reported missing, her case spread quickly across Saskatchewan. Posters went up in schools, businesses, and community centers. National media picked up the story, turning her into a face recognized across the country. Her mother became a vocal advocate, giving interviews, appearing at vigils, and keeping the pressure on investigators. For her family, every lead mattered, no matter how small. Over the years, organizations like the Missing Children Society of Canada, along with social media campaigns, have kept Mekayla's name alive. Her disappearance has been featured on true crime podcasts, TV programs, and documentaries, each hoping to spark the memory of someone who might know the truth. Despite hundreds of tips, no concrete breakthroughs have ever been made, no suspects have been publicly named, no arrests, and no verified sightings after April 12, 2016. Police have repeatedly said they believe Mekayla did not leave Yorkton alone. Someone knows what happened, but without hard evidence, the case remains frozen in uncertainty. Mekayla's disappearance represents more than just a single missing teenager. It is a symbol of how vulnerable young people can be in the age of online communication, how a simple meeting, a few misplaced steps, can unravel into years of heartbreak. Her family continues to search for answers. They continue to hope that even after all this time, the right piece of information will surface. A memory, a witness, a name. For the community of Yorkton, the case left a lasting mark. A reminder that danger doesn't always come with warning signs, and that sometimes the most ordinary morning can become the start of an enduring mystery. It has now been years since Mekayla was last seen walking out of that bus depot. She would be in her mid-20s today. But instead, she remains frozen in time, forever remembered as a 16-year-old girl who left her school, wandered across town, and disappeared into silence. Someone knows the truth. Maybe it's buried in a phone record. Maybe it's hidden in a memory someone is too afraid to share. Or maybe it's a secret carried by a single individual who has never come forward. Until that moment arrives, the disappearance of Mekayla Bali will remain one of Canada's most haunting cold cases. Decades later, the truth remains hidden, but someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to Mekayla that day? Was she lured? Did she plan to leave? Or was something else at play? The disappearance of Adrien McNaughton, June 12, 1972, Holmes Lake, Ontario. The afternoon sun glitters across the water as a family fishes along the shoreline. It's a peaceful day, the kind of moment parents hope their children will remember forever. But within minutes, that peace is shattered. 5-year-old Adrien McNaughton, a small boy with blonde hair and bright eyes, climbs a small hill near the lake and disappears into the trees. His father calls out. No answer. The family spreads out, shouting his name. Silence. By nightfall, hundreds of volunteers, police, and even helicopters are searching the woods. Flashlights beam across the forest floor. Dogs sniff the ground. But Adrien is gone. No clothing, no tracks, no sound, no trace. And what began as an ordinary fishing trip becomes one of Canada's most enduring mysteries. Adrien was the youngest of 5 children. Just 5 years old, he was described as gentle, playful, and a little shy. He loved being outdoors, tagging along with his siblings, and like many children, he had a curious streak, the kind that made him wander just a little farther than he should. The McNaughton family lived in Arnprior, Ontario, a small community about an hour from Ottawa. That June day, they decided to take a trip to Holmes Lake, a remote fishing spot surrounded by thick woods. For the family, it was meant to be a simple outing, a day of relaxation away from daily life. But Adrien's boundless curiosity would lead him to wander a few steps too far, and from there, the story takes a dark turn. The details of that afternoon are heartbreaking in their simplicity. Adrien was with his father, his siblings, and a family friend at the lake. At one point, he seemed restless. His father recalled him tugging on the fishing line, looking frustrated, and then walking away up a small incline. It wasn't far, just a hill covered in trees, a short climb. He was in sight one moment, and gone the next. His father called after him, expecting Adrien to return within seconds. When he didn't, the family grew concerned. They searched the area immediately, calling his name, scanning the trees. But within minutes, it became clear. Adrien had vanished. Word spread quickly. By evening, police had joined the search. Over the next several days, hundreds of volunteers poured into the forest. Helicopters flew overhead. Boats searched the lake. Dogs tracked the terrain. Every inch of the area was combed. Yet no sign of Adrien was ever found. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, nothing to suggest where he had gone or what had happened. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed him whole. From the very beginning, investigators and the public offered theories, each one raising more questions than answers. The simplest explanation was that Adrien wandered too far into the woods, became disoriented, and could not find his way back. But searchers combed every possible path and found no evidence. Even a child's track should have been visible in the soft ground. Another theory was that Adrien may have fallen into the lake and drowned. Yet divers searched extensively, dragging the waters for days. No body was ever recovered. Some speculated that Adrien may have been taken. The area was remote, but not impossible for someone to access by road. Could a stranger have been waiting nearby? If so, how could they have approached and vanished with him so quickly, without leaving behind a single trace? There were whispers of darker possibilities, that someone close to the family might have been involved. But no evidence ever supported this, and Adrien's disappearance has never been tied to foul play officially. The Ontario Provincial Police treated Adrien's case as a top priority. For weeks, the area remained swarmed with officers, volunteers, and media. Yet each lead dried up almost immediately. No footprints, no sightings, no physical evidence. The lack of clues frustrated investigators and devastated the family. His father, Jim McNaughton, gave interviews pleading for help, describing the agony of not knowing whether his son was alive or gone forever. The disappearance shocked Ontario. Newspapers carried headlines about the missing boy. The image of a small, smiling child lost in the wilderness struck fear into every parent's heart. Communities organized fundraisers and prayer vigils. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, the story faded from the front page. For the McNaughton family, though, the nightmare never ended. For decades, the case remained cold. Files sat in police archives. Occasionally, new tips emerged. A reported sighting, a vague memory, but none ever led anywhere. Adrien's disappearance became one of those cases people remembered with a shiver. A child who simply walked into the woods and never came out. In 2016, more than 40 years after Adrien vanished, the case gained new life. CBC launched its investigative podcast, Someone Knows Something, hosted by David Ridgen. The first season focused entirely on Adrien's disappearance. Ridgen interviewed family members, revisited the site, and examined old theories. Perhaps most hauntingly, he arranged for cadaver dogs to search the area around Holmes Lake. The dogs alerted in specific locations, suggesting the possible presence of human remains. But excavations and further testing found nothing conclusive. The mystery remained. The podcast brought international attention to Adrien's case, sparking renewed public interest and leading to fresh tips. But once again, no definitive answers emerged. Adrien's disappearance is one of the most unsettling cold cases in Canadian history, not only because he was so young, but because the circumstances are so ordinary. A fishing trip, a short walk, a child who vanishes in seconds. His case highlights the fragility of life, the gaps in even the most extensive search efforts, and the endless torment families endure when answers never come. For the McNaughton family, the decades have been filled with unanswered questions. Adrien's siblings grew up without their brother. His parents carried the pain of not knowing. And the community of Arnprior still remembers the little boy with the blonde hair who walked into the woods and never returned. If Adrien were alive today, he would be in his late 50s. But in the public's memory, he remains forever 5 years old, a child lost in time. What happened on that hill near Holmes Lake? Did he become lost, just out of reach of rescuers? Did he fall victim to an unseen danger? Or was something far more sinister at play? Until the truth comes to light, Adrien's disappearance will remain a chilling reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unimaginable. Decades later, the truth remains hidden, but someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to Adrien that day in 1972? Was it a tragic accident or something more? The disappearance of Helen Claire Frost, October 13th, 1970, Prince George, British Columbia. The evening is cool, the leaves scattered across sidewalks as autumn settles in. A 17-year-old girl slips out of her small apartment, telling her sister she's going for a walk. She doesn't take a bag. She doesn't bring money. She simply leaves, wearing a light jacket against the chill. Her name is Helen Claire Frost. She walks out into the night and is never seen again. No one hears a scream. No one spots her on the streets. No one reports giving her a ride. By the next morning, it's as if she has vanished into thin air. More than 50 years later, her case remains open. Her family still searches for answers, and her name has become one of the many haunting mysteries from northern British Columbia, a place now known for far too many disappearances. Helen Claire Frost was born in 1952, part of a large, close-knit family. By 1970, she was just 17 years old, living in Prince George with her older sister, Sandy. Helen had recently left high school. Like many teenagers, she was searching for direction, torn between childhood and adulthood, eager for independence, but still vulnerable in so many ways. Friends remembered her as friendly and thoughtful, though she carried a quiet restlessness. She had been talking about making changes in her life. Some believed she was considering moving away. Others thought she might have been struggling with personal challenges. But to those who loved her, Helen was simply a young woman at a crossroads, trying to figure out her future. That October night, whatever weighed on her mind led her to leave the apartment. But where she went, and why she never came back, is still unknown. On October 13th, Helen left her apartment around 8:20 p.m. She told her sister she was going for a walk. That was it. No further explanation. The timing was strange. It was already dark. She didn't have plans with friends that anyone knew of. She wasn't carrying extra clothing or supplies. It didn't look like she intended to be gone long. But after that moment, the trail went cold almost immediately. Unlike modern cases, there were no security cameras, no cell phone records to trace. If anyone saw her that night, they never came forward. When Helen didn't return home, her family grew worried. Within days, the RCMP was notified. But in 1970, missing person protocols were not what they are today. A teenager walking off was often assumed to be a runaway. Police initially considered that Helen may have left voluntarily, perhaps to start fresh somewhere new. But as the days turned into weeks, that theory made less and less sense. Helen had left behind all her belongings. She hadn't packed clothing, she hadn't withdrawn money, and she never contacted her family again. Her family insisted she wouldn't just vanish without saying something. She was close to her siblings. She had responsibilities. And yet, no matter how many times police retraced her last known steps, nothing surfaced. Over time, several theories have been raised about what may have happened to Helen. Some still suggest Helen chose to leave on her own. She had spoken about wanting change in her life, and perhaps that night she decided to act. But if she had started a new life, why didn't she ever reach out to her family? Why did she leave with nothing? Another theory is that Helen may have suffered an accident while walking that night. Prince George in 1970 was surrounded by wilderness, rail tracks, and rivers, but despite searches, no remains were ever discovered. The most unsettling possibility is that Helen was the victim of foul play. Prince George would later become infamous as part of the Highway of Tears corridor, a region where dozens of women and girls, many indigenous, went missing or were killed. Was Helen one of the earliest victims of what would become a devastating pattern? Or was her case unrelated, a tragedy all its own? The biggest challenge in Helen's case was the complete absence of evidence. No witnesses placed her anywhere after she left her apartment. No physical clues were found. Without those starting points, investigators had little to work with. Her disappearance faded from public attention quickly. Unlike more recent cases, there was little media coverage to keep her story alive. For decades, her family carried the burden largely in silence. Helen's sister Sandy has been one of the strongest voices for keeping her memory alive. Over the years, she pushed for renewed investigations, refusing to let her sister's case be forgotten. In 2017, nearly half a century after Helen vanished, the RCMP confirmed they were still actively reviewing her disappearance. They appealed to the public for information, hoping that with time, someone might come forward with a memory, a clue, or a confession. So far, no breakthrough has come. Helen's story is heartbreaking, not just because of her disappearance, but because of how little attention it received at the time. A young woman vanished from Prince George, and her case quickly slipped into obscurity. Her disappearance is now often mentioned alongside the broader crisis of missing women in northern British Columbia. For many families, Helen's case symbolizes how easily young women's stories were overlooked in the past, and how families were left to fight for recognition. For her relatives, the pain has never faded. Every year that passes is another year without answers, another reminder that somewhere out there, someone may still know what happened. Helen Claire Frost walked out of her apartment on a cool October evening in 1970. She promised nothing, carried nothing, and never returned. Did she run away, leaving behind the life she no longer wanted? Did she fall victim to an accident, her remains lost to time and nature? Or was she taken?
Silenced by someone who crossed her path that night? Until the truth emerges, Helen remains not just a name on a missing persons list, but a haunting reminder of how quickly a life can vanish and how silence can stretch across generations. Decades later, the truth remains buried, but someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to Helen that night in Prince George? Was it a choice, an accident, or something darker? The disappearance of Jean Virginia, Ginny, Sampare, October 14, 1971. Gitsegukla, British Columbia. A young woman stands near a railroad overpass as evening settles in. The Skeena River rushes nearby, its current dark and fast. She's not alone. Her cousin is with her, the two talking quietly, sharing time like family often do. But in a matter of minutes, everything changes. The cousin leaves briefly. When he returns, Ginny is gone. No scream, no sound of struggle, just silence, broken only by the roar of the river. 18-year-old Jean Virginia Sampare, known to her family and friends as Ginny, has vanished. More than 50 years later, her disappearance remains one of the most enduring and haunting mysteries connected to what would later become known as the Highway of Tears. Jean Virginia. Ginny Sampare was just 18 years old when she disappeared. She grew up in the Gitsan community of Gitsegukla, a small indigenous village nestled along the Skeena River, not far from the city of Terrace in northern British Columbia. Her family described her as bright, soft-spoken, and deeply connected to her community. Like many young women her age, she was full of potential, standing at the threshold of adulthood. She helped with her family, kept close to her cousins, and was known for her warmth. But Ginny also carried the challenges of growing up indigenous in northern BC during the early 1970s, a time when systemic neglect and racism often left communities vulnerable, and when disappearances of indigenous women too often went unnoticed by authorities. Her disappearance would sadly foreshadow a tragedy that grew for decades, the long, painful list of missing and unalived women and girls along Highway 16, forever remembered as the Highway of Tears. On the evening of October 14, 1971, Ginny was last seen with her cousin near a railroad overpass outside Gitsegukla. Though I spent time together, talking as the day faded. At some point, her cousin left briefly. Some reports say he went home for a moment, others that he stepped away only for a short errand. When he came back, Ginny was gone. The timing was painfully tight. She had vanished within a narrow window, just minutes perhaps. Some in the community speculated that Ginny may have gone down to the Skeena River. The river is powerful, cold, and unforgiving. Could she have fallen? Could she have drowned? But others weren't convinced. They feared something darker, that Ginny had been taken. When Ginny didn't return home, her family knew something was wrong.
They raised the alarm quickly. But in 1971, missing Indigenous women did not always receive the urgent attention they deserved. Initial police response leaned toward the idea that Ginny may have drowned. It seemed to fit. She was last seen near the river, and the current was strong. But there was no evidence. No clothing was found along the banks. No body surfaced downstream. Her family pushed back. They insisted she wouldn't simply vanish into the water without a trace. They believed foul play was possible. Unfortunately, with no witnesses and no physical evidence, the investigation stalled almost immediately.
Over the decades, Ginny's case has been framed through several theories. The earliest police theory was that Ginny fell into or entered the river. But without a body or belongings, this remained speculation. For her family, this explanation felt incomplete, too convenient, too dismissive. There were suggestions she may have chosen to leave voluntarily, to start a new life elsewhere. But her family rejected this firmly. Ginny was deeply rooted in her community. She hadn't packed belongings, hadn't made plans, and left without a word. The most haunting possibility is that Ginny was abducted. The location, a roadside area near train tracks and a major river, left opportunities for someone to approach unnoticed. With Highway 16 nearby, which would later become infamous for disappearances, her case now appears to fit a larger, tragic pattern. At the time, Ginny's case received little media attention. Like so many Indigenous disappearances in that era, her story was overshadowed, treated as less urgent than cases involving non-Indigenous victims. Her family never stopped searching, but the broader public remained largely unaware. It wasn't until decades later, when the Highway of Tears gained national recognition, that Ginny's story resurfaced as part of that narrative. For her family, the lack of urgency in the early days was devastating. They carried the grief largely on their own, waiting for authorities to take the case seriously. No one was ever charged in Ginny's disappearance. No remains were ever found, and while her name appears on official lists of the missing, her file remains open but stagnant. In 2017, RCMP confirmed that her case was still active, though no breakthroughs had been reported. For her family, the silence has been deafening. Half a century of unanswered questions. Ginny's story is not just about one young woman lost. It is also about this larger crisis of missing Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Her disappearance predates many of the Highway of Tears cases, making her one of the earliest known victims connected to that corridor. Her family continues to seek justice, pushing for recognition, answers, and accountability. They refuse to let her be forgotten, even as the decades pass. For the broader public, Ginny's case serves as a reminder. Every missing person matters. Every disappearance leaves behind a family, a community, a wound that never fully heals. On that October evening in 1971, Ginny walked into the night with her cousin, and within minutes, she was gone. Did she stumble into the Skeena River, her life claimed by its relentless current? Was she taken by someone passing through, a stranger whose name has never been revealed? Or was her disappearance one of the earliest shadows of the Highway of Tears, foreshadowing decades of tragedy to come? Until the truth emerges, Ginny remains a symbol of loss, of silence, and of the enduring fight for justice. Decades later, the truth remains buried, but someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to Ginny that night near the Skeena River? Was it an accident, or was something more sinister at play? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime mysteries. The disappearance of Melanie Ethier, September 29, 1996, New Liskeard, Ontario. It's late on a Sunday night in this small northern town. The streets are quiet, the kind of silence where every footstep echoes. 19-year-old Melanie Ethier leaves a friend's house, planning to walk home. It isn't far, a familiar route, one she's taken before. She promises to call when she gets in. But Melanie never makes it home. When the morning comes, her bed is untouched. Her phone never rings. Her family begins to worry, and soon the entire town is searching. No one saw her. No one heard her. She simply walked out into the night,
and vanished. Melanie was 19 years old, full of life and promise. She had just graduated high school and was working at a local daycare while dreaming of becoming a teacher. Friends described her as warm, caring, and deeply responsible, the kind of young woman everyone trusted. She was close to her family, especially her mother, Cecile. They spoke often, shared routines, and leaned on one another. Melanie wasn't the kind of teenager who disappeared without explanation. She had plans. She had goals. She had a future. That's what makes her disappearance so devastating. On September 29th, Melanie spent the evening with friends. It was ordinary, just teenagers talking, laughing, unwinding at the end of the weekend. Around midnight, she decided it was time to head home. The walk should have taken only about 15 minutes. She knew the route well. But somewhere between her friend's house and her doorstep, Melanie disappeared. She didn't call. She didn't show up. And when morning came, her absence was impossible to ignore. When Melanie's family realized she hadn't come home, panic set in quickly. She wasn't the type to vanish without telling someone. Her mother reported her missing, and police began their search. At first, officers considered the possibility that she had gone off with friends, maybe decided to stay out late. But as hours turned into days, that theory collapsed. Melanie had left behind her belongings, her work, her entire life. Witnesses began to come forward with small pieces of information. Some reported seeing her walking that night. Others thought they saw a young woman near a vehicle. But none of these accounts could be confirmed. The chilling fact remained. Melanie had vanished in a matter of minutes, on a route that should have been safe. The Ontario Provincial Police launched an investigation. They searched the town, questioned residents, and followed leads. But every promising detail seemed to end in a dead end. No body was ever found. No clothing, bag, or personal belongings surfaced. No confirmed sightings beyond that night. Over the years, police interviewed dozens of people, friends, acquaintances, and strangers alike. They tested theories, examined tips, and even pursued potential suspects. But nothing stuck. At one point, investigators considered the possibility that Melanie had left voluntarily, maybe to start a new life elsewhere. But her family dismissed that quickly. She had no reason to run, no hidden troubles, no secret life. She had simply been walking home. Several theories have surrounded Melanie's case over the years. The strongest theory is that Melanie was taken while walking home. The area she disappeared from had limited witnesses, and it's possible a car pulled up, offering a ride or forcing her inside. Others believe she may have encountered someone familiar. Melanie was trusting, and if she saw a person she knew, she might have stopped to talk, making her vulnerable to someone with bad intentions. A fringe theory suggests she may have left voluntarily, but this has little support. She left behind everything and had no history of running away. Unlike many cold cases that fade into obscurity, Melanie's story remained present in her community. Her mother, Cecile, refused to let her daughter be forgotten. She put up posters, spoke to media outlets, and worked with missing persons organizations to keep the case alive. In the years that followed, Melanie's face appeared on billboards across northern Ontario. She was featured on true crime podcasts, television programs, and most notably on CBC's The Next Call, a series dedicated to re-examining long unsolved cases. Her mother became a tireless advocate, not only for Melanie, but for all families of the missing, demanding answers, pushing for accountability, and never letting her daughter's name slip away. Despite the attention, no resolution ever came. Leads dried up, suspects came and went, and as the years passed, the weight of silence grew heavier. In recent years, police have reiterated that Melanie's case is still active. They continue to review tips, check new information, and hold on to the possibility that someone, somewhere, may still come forward. But as of today, no arrests have been made. The disappearance of Melanie Ethier is haunting not just because of the mystery, but because of the emptiness it left behind. She was a young woman at the beginning of her life, a daughter, a friend, a caregiver to children at the daycare. Her absence reshaped her family forever. For her mother, the pain is indescribable. Decades of waiting, of wondering, of imagining what could have been. For her community, the case became a rallying point. It forced people to confront the reality that even in small towns, danger can strike. That sometimes the most ordinary walk home can become the start of an endless mystery. On that September night in 1996, Melanie Ethier walked out of her friend's home, promising to call when she arrived. She never did. Did she encounter someone she trusted, only to be betrayed? Was she taken by a stranger, swallowed into the silence of the night? Or is there another explanation still buried under years of unanswered questions? Until the truth comes to light, Melanie remains not just a missing person, but a symbol of the resilience of families who refuse to stop searching. Decades later, the truth remains buried, but someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. What do you think happened to Melanie on her short walk home? Was it a chance encounter or something planned? From families that vanished without a trace, to teenagers who walked out into the night and never came home, each of these stories carries the same haunting silence, decades of questions and no answers. Somewhere out there, the truth about these cases still exists. Someone knows what happened. Which of these cold cases stayed with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries that still remain unsolved.